There are truly only a few constants in the human experience. We all die, we all poop, and we all got scared shitless as a child because we left the TV on Cartoon Network a little bit too long, and at 10 p.m. that weird guy from Robot Chicken got on the screen and it was terrifying. Why was he so scary? Adult Swim. Love it or hate it, it has had a massive impact on American culture for the past 21 years. That's right, 21 years. This sin fest of adult animation has been rocking its way on a children's entertainment network for as long as a human being has to live to drink. But when Adult Swim debuted, adult animation wasn't like a new idea. In 1972, the X-rated film Fritz the Cats made like $90 million worldwide. You had The Simpsons, which first aired in 1989, and I think it's still going. I haven't checked in a little bit. And in 2005, South Park won the Peabody Award, which is insane, but it's proof that, you know, this wasn't new. But what sets apart Adult Swim from other channels? Well, I guess not channel. It's a programming block. But what sets it apart isn't its notable longevity or its, you know, tendency to shock audiences. It was its ability to create its own space to showcase alternative voices and ideas under one roof. Its ability to bring outsider art to the mainstream. And its ability to, for some reason, not worry about making any money while doing the first two things. Welcome to Adult Swim, one of the most important cultural touchstones of American modern television. So before we dive into Adult Swim, and yeah, there's gonna be a lot of swimming puns in this one, we need to take a little trip into an insane world known as the 1990s. Some of you kiddos have only been alive for years that start with a 2 and a 0, so let me tell you about the 90s as an expert on the decade. Quarter-operated phone booths littered street corners, which is crazy because not only were you making literal phone calls in public in boxes, but you also had to have quarters on you all the time, which is weird to me. Pizza Hut was a sit-down restaurant, and they also had these really cool lamps that I cannot find for the life of me. I want one so goddamn bad. Games like Doom and Quake were giving sexless men with no aspiration in life something to do while they whittled away. And cable TV had grown from a novelty to a necessity. Originally, cable TV was something for rich people to have to flex on the poors who were still using rabbit ears to get channels. But then in the 90s, cable TV became a giant industry generating over $1 billion in ad revenue every year. And this bizarre backdrop of prosperity and ugly culture was the perfect pressure cooker for the insanity of Adult Swim. I had to read that one off the phone because that was a really hard full sentence to say and memorize. In the early 90s, cartoons were a far cry from what we know them as today. Instead of, you know, original shows that people know and love, it was really just mainly Hanna-Barbera reruns for the most part. You know, Hanna-Barbera, the studio that was founded by the Tom and Jerry creators in the early 50s, and then they made a bunch of terribly animated shows like the Jetsons, Yogi Bear, Flintstones, like all those things. Fun fact, almost every Hanna-Barbera character has a collar or something around their neck in their character design because it made it easier to animate their faces by just swapping out their heads completely. That has nothing to do with the video, but now you'll never be able to unsee it. But the rise of syndicated cable made it so Sunday cartoons were becoming less and less popular over time. The kids are drinking Surge soda and eating Future ice cream. They don't got time for no goddamn wacky races. This allowed the back catalog of Hanna-Barbera cartoons to drop in price so TBS could sweep them up, and then that eventually led to the creation of Cartoon Network in 1992. And it did pretty well. I mean, there was not a lot of places on cable TV for kids to go and watch shit, so it was filling a vacuum. However, it had one large problem that other channels did not have to deal with, and this problem is, of course, the fact that, let me see here, children are dorks who go to bed early. Pretty consistent problem across the board for TV people. So advertisers don't want to buy ad space at like 10 p.m. on Cartoon Network because literally nobody is watching that. And when you consider what other people were doing for late night TV in the 90s, you can see the advertiser's point. TV after 10 o'clock was hyper-focused on adults. Still kind of is, honestly. Major networks aired like talk shows and infomercials, and cable networks would play like risque movies or ads for phone sex, which was a big thing in the 90s, phone sex. Which is crazy to me. I don't think I would ever see the appeal of that. I'm just happy how far we've come in the porn industry. This is actually a fun fact. The USA Network was wiling out with a program called USA Up All Night. It was hosted by Gilbert Gottfried, and it would just play heavily edited B-list porn exploitation movies all the time. Like one of them was Nymphoid Barbarian and Dinosaur Hell. I'd watch that. I'd watch that right now. Even children's cable programming pioneer Nickelodeon would change their whole thing and do Nick at Night, which would be like, you know, sitcoms from times earlier. So they would get the adult appeal without being, you know, degenerates. Something that you will learn Adult Swim did not take. But I've been neglecting to mention one important tidbit that even the Cartoon Network executives weren't counting on. A third of Cartoon Network's watchers were adults. weird adults, but adults nonetheless. So you got a time slot where people aren't watching, you got some weird adults that might be floating around. What do? Well, you make a cartoon show for weird adults. In 1994, Cartoon Network made a show called Space Ghost Coast to Coast. And if you don't know what this is, get excited. There was an old Hanna-Barbera cartoon called Space Ghost that like literally everyone forgot about. And what they did was they take clips from that show and they would cut them up and edit them and voice them over to make a completely new show. Because literally Cartoon Network did not have any money for original programming, so they had to cut corners every chance they got. The original show was about a space superhero that fought dinosaurs, which is the most 60s fever dream coke bender idea I've ever heard. So then they took that character and put it in a talk show setting, which just by the premise alone is hilarious, I think. And since Cartoon Network did not have an original content budget, they had to funnel advertising budget into the show itself. Like they couldn't advertise Cartoon Network on other channels, they just had to put that money into Space Ghost Coast to Coast. And personally, I think it was worth it, and historically it turned out to be, but a lot of people were against the show originally. It was way before its time with extremely well-written jokes and absurdist humor, and it also got a bunch of real-life celebrities to go on the show in a weird meta talk show kind of thing. I mean, to get the vibe of the show, all you have to do is see the time Conan O'Brien went on, and instead of Space Ghost interviewing him, Space Ghost just like investigated an ant for 10 minutes straight while Conan just dealt with no one talking to him.
I think this show is very bad.
Okay.
And should be stopped.
Oh, okay.
I think you're a bad person, and don't take this the wrong way.
All right.
Just next level stuff. Just really next level shit. The show quickly gained a cult following, and it was showing some promise. So the executives were like, okay, what else can we do? This is kind of working. And they were like, I don't know, let's try anime? Anime might work. In the 90s, a lot of people, no one cared about anime in the 90s, really, at all. Some people did, but they were this. So the mainstream appeal of anime was not there at all. So licensing was cheap. So they were like, screw it, throw it up there. And suddenly this became a staple of the channel too during the nighttime segment, which led to the 1997 block Toonami, which you should know about. It's iconic. And it showed a lot of kids who had never had experience watching anime before things like Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon and Gundam Wing, all these shows that everyone loves now. So the executives all get together and talk to Mike Lazzo, the creator of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, and they say, hey, listen, we're starting to fuck with the vision a little bit, okay? We think we can turn this garbage time slot into something hot and bothered with the right direction. And Mike was like, let me hop in the kitchen, let me see what I can cook up real quick. Of course, the ad sales team at Cartoon Network was resistant to it because they were like, you know, this is a cartoon children's network and you're selling really adult shows. How are we supposed to pitch this? And they had a good point, but Lazzo, I don't know which one it is, but he had a year to pull this off. So, you know, who's to say he's even gonna get it done? Who knows if he can pull this off? A small group of people, headed by Lazzo, started working around the clock for a thing that would eventually become Adult Swim. None of them, mind you, with a history of animation in their background. None of them had that. What they did have was a shared vision of weird shit and the ability to work really hard for long hours. A lot of them had full-time jobs at a Cartoon Network, and they also had another full-time job, which was creating Adult Swim. And there was no like offices for the Adult Swim team, so they had to do whatever they could, wherever they could. They were editing footage in broom closets and using old PCs that no one else was using because that's all they had at the time. And also, even though Cartoon Network gave Adult Swim the green light, no one at the company was really happy about it. Shows like Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, and C-Lab 2021, which were also two Hanna-Barbera shows that, like, you know, no one was thinking about anymore, so they gave it the old Space Ghost treatment and just kind of changed things about it and remixed it. Well, these remixes actually ended up upsetting the original creators of the show because they didn't say you could do that, and the original shows were like fun kids cartoons, and these were not at all.
Try to get word to my mother. Man, f your mother.
Alex Toth, the original creator of Birdman and C-Labs, was like, yo, stop. Please stop. Which I understand, but how can you watch this clip from C-Lab and tell me it's not worth it?
Dude, check me out. I'm like a little otter. A sexy little otter. Damn.
I quote this daily. No one knows what I'm talking about, but I am a sexy little otter. And it's not just the creators. People inside the company were confused as hell as to what is going on. Executives still fully didn't understand what the appeal or even the base humor of these shows actually were. The ad team still didn't know how to pitch these shows to advertisers because I personally wouldn't know how to do that. And once again, people were editing footage in closets. So, you know, the work-to-life balance was not great. But despite the crazy working conditions and initial confusion, the trials and tribulations were over, and Adult Swim finally debuted on September 2nd, 2001. Well, there was more trials and tribulations coming up, but they were out of Adult Swim's control. They couldn't really do anything about it. So the red carpet wasn't exactly laid out for Adult Swim's premiere, which makes sense because it aired at midnight and people don't really care about new programming blocks. Like, looking back on it, yeah, it's Adult Swim, it's a big deal, but like, CBS is like, we're running new, who gives a fuck? No one's tuning in for that. But it was a weird start, like it was a slow roll. Like it wasn't a, hey, here's Adult Swim completely finished, enjoy it, we're done making it. It was a slow rollout. It was testing the waters of the late night audiences. On the first night at midnight, they just played the first episode of Home Movies, which is a fantastic show, but then it kind of tapered off after that. And then a few months down the line, they also soft launched a couple other shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force and other popular Adult Swim cartoons. And they did this by airing it unannounced at 4 a.m. in December of 2001, so I don't know if they don't want people to see these things, but whatever. And then finally, after a 5-month delay, Adult Swim officially premiered on a Labor Day weekend, which is crazy because people are doing shit on Labor Day weekend. No one is whatever. Despite everything I just said, Adult Swim somehow managed to grow exponentially throughout its first year. And this is in spite of the fact that all the advertising promoting Adult Swim was not showing people why they should watch it. It was to prove to people that children shouldn't. Which is a wild way to handle this. But the explicit anti-advertising campaign actually really worked, and it kind of set the precedent for what the channel was going to be for the rest of its life. It nailed the coveted 18 to 34 age bracket, and that's my people, baby. That's what I work for. Advertisers still had no goddamn clue what was going on with these oddball shows, but all they knew was they wanted a piece of it, baby, because people are watching it. And Adult Swim soon expanded to multiple nights with more original programming and more anime. They're always going to put more anime in this puppy. And it also became a haven for animated shows that were canceled by their original networks. Futurama and Family Guy both were canceled by Fox, and then they found a new life on Adult Swim, which, you know, gave it enough reputation and viewership to start those shows back over again. And if you take nothing out of this video, please understand that the only reason why Futurama continued to go was because of Adult Swim. So that's all you gotta know about this channel and why it's so great. And the popularity of these X-Network shows brought a lot of people to the channel, and they were programmed earlier into the Adult Swim block, so like it was a buffer between children's cartoons and the weird shit that you're going to see later on. But actually, the crazy thing is the original programming that had all the crazy stuff in it, that became the main appeal of the channel, which nobody expected. We got Aqua Teen Hunger Force, which came from when the creator heard a story about how a fast food restaurant was putting together pieces of old burgers to sell to people like they were new. That's how this show started. The show has an anthropomorphic milkshake, a box of fries, and a wad of meat, known as Meat Wad. They live in a suburban neighborhood, they fight aliens, and they live next to a perverted piece of shit named Carl. That's the premise of the show. It was a hit almost in spite of itself. It tried so hard to make people not like it. It was thought to be such an unwatchable show that network executives said that maybe let's make them detectives. Make them detectives. People will like that more. It makes a little bit more sense. And I guess, I mean, the show really had no plot to begin with, so if you give it a little something to go on, I guess it could make people watch it, but they were detectives for 3 episodes, and then they dropped that premise immediately and never went back to it. Where else are you gonna find this kind of stuff besides Adult Swim? The network begged for them to change the voice of Meatwad because no one can understand him when he talks. Literally, viewers were writing in saying, am I going crazy? I can't understand what this guy is saying, and they refused. The writers refused to do that. The creators also insisted that the voice of Master Shake, Dana Snyder, should get absolutely hammered for his audition tape to get the role, and he did, and he got the role.
I am a modern-day Tom Sawyer.
All of this combined made Aqua Teen Hunger Force the flagship show of the channel for years to come. We have the Venture Bros, which is a really important show if you look into it a little bit. It was a parody of the 60s style superhero family shows like Johnny Quest, but after 7 seasons, it morphed into an entirely different thing altogether. Venture Bros was one of the first cartoon shows that adopted the golden age of television rules in terms of writing and plot. While other cartoon shows had short stories and very little continuity in terms of, like, you know, like The Simpsons always wear the same shirt and everything goes back to normal at the end of the episode, Venture Bros created a cast of pop culture obsessed superheroes that, like, fought generational trauma that built upon itself. But the show would constantly take the audience expectations and turn them on their head, because like one episode they would maybe cover the topic of toxic masculinity and how much that can harm somebody, and then the next episode they'll bring in Brick Frog, who's a guy who dresses up like a frog and throws bricks at people.
Brick Frog!
Thank you!
Part of the success of Venture Bros was the fact that it was only written by 2 people. There was no writer's room for this show. And that significantly slowed down the production of the show because it took 14 years to make 7 seasons, which is a bad turnaround rate, but it created a mind meld of consistent, thoroughly thought out script writing that the creators called Unibrain. Instead of a writer's room where, you know, comedy writers are fighting over who gets their joke in there and it's not really about who, you know, the characters or the plot, Venture Bros became an honest expression of a very particular type of nerdy obsessive. The exact type of person who is up at 3 a.m. and watching cartoons. So it worked out perfectly. But as much as Adult Swim nailed it with their adult cartoons, things got weirder weirder over time. They switched the script a little bit by including live action programming to their adult cartoon block. The surreal satire of Tim and Eric's awesome show Great Job and the Eric Andre show brought a whole new brand of anti-comedy and cringe humor to people who have never seen that shit before. The editing style and surreal sense of humor of these shows created a home for offbeat performers to experiment and turned indie comics into influential voices in mainstream comedy. Without Adult Swim, someone like Eric Andre would still be pretending to be a caveman at Geico live events. And speaking of oddball people that no one else is going to give a shot to, Adult Swim also did live action things that they like to call infomercials. They were not infomercials. These shows usually aired at 4 a.m. with no warning, no title card. They would just pretend to be commercials, or they wouldn't even pretend to be commercials. This is something I'm really passionate about. I love these things. Sometimes Adult Swim humor was the fact that there was no humor. Like, it was more about all the parts being not funny that made the whole bit hilarious. If you stumbled upon one of these infomercials at 4 a.m. and you had a little dribble of mental illness in your brain, you would wake up with grippy socks in a hospital the next morning. We have unedited footage of a bear, which starts out like, you know, an unedited footage of a bear, and then it breaks into an infomercial about anti-allergy medication and becomes a horrifying example of doppelgangers and I guess the big pharmaceutical industry. We have Too Many Cooks, which starts like a 90s comedy sitcom and then it devolves horribly. It's terrifying. And then we have There Are People in This House, which is my favorite thing I've ever seen in my entire life. If you have the time, jump into the ARG if There Are People in This House. It seems like it doesn't make sense. It makes a lot of sense and it's horrifying. Wham City Comedy made most of these, and Adult Swim is just doing stuff like this because they can, and it's still working. Like, imagine TBS doing something like this. Imagine MSNBC throwing on a horrifying bear video. They'd get shut down. Adult Swim doesn't care though, baby. What other channel are you gonna get stuff like this? You won't find it anywhere else. Adult Swim is in a league of its own. Adult Swim didn't reinvent the wheel, but they did create something wholly unique. A mainstream place where animation for adults and subversive comedy could grow. It would be impossible to accurately measure the pop culture influence that Adult Swim has had on the American public, or the world, for that matter. And that's because it's bigger than the sum of its parts. You can draw parallels between Adult Swim's original programming and the biggest adult animated shows right now, like Bob's Burgers or BoJack Horseman. Or you could find parallels between the surrealist comedy of Tim Heidecker and Eric Andre into shows like I Think You Should Leave. That probably had a huge influence. There was countless writers, producers, animators that came out of Adult Swim or came into Adult Swim, which changed the landscape forever. But altogether, Adult Swim was mostly just a vibe. It was just a vibe that took America by storm. The brand exuded a feeling that anything could happen on this channel at any time. It had weird but fantastic self-referential bumpers, played insane April Fool's jokes on its viewers, and arguably brought anime into America's mainstream. I want to bring that up once again. I really think Adult Swim was a big part of that. It turned TV into an art form that commented on TV itself, which no one was doing back then. It's a place where a show like Robot Chicken that was rejected by Mad TV, Saturday Night Live, and Comedy Central could end up winning how many Emmys? Two Emmy Awards. And most importantly, to me, Adult Swim is a channel that's willing to take risks on creators who came from the internet, and no one else is able to do that. No other channel is doing that. I was raised on YouTube and Newgrounds, and watching people that I've been watching since I was a wee little tot get full shows on Adult Swim makes me want to cry. It makes me so happy. If you started on the internet, the industry as a whole probably looks down upon you and doesn't think you're a real artist. Then Adult Swim said, let's take a shot on it, and now we have Rick and Morty, we have Smiling Friends, we have Haha You Clowns, we have Crystal Fantasy, literally all the shit Jack Stauber is doing. Like, it's really important to the culture what Adult Swim is doing. Streaming has completely disrupted the entertainment industry, but Adult Swim is something that could not be put into a simple box. Now entering its third decade on television, Adult Swim is probably the most popular it ever has been, and I think I know why. Despite what everyone thinks in this industry, good art is good art. And even though it's not advertiser friendly, if you build it, they will come. And then when you have the people there, you can sell them a Trump coin at 3 a.m. or whatever the hell they run ads for on that channel. New videos every Saturday, maybe one on Wednesday. There's a lot in this video I wasn't able to touch on. Like, I really wanted to go into the bumpers, but like, there's only so much I can say without just reading the bumpers. They're hilarious. You should look them up. Also, the art style. I don't know much about art styles, but the whole vibe of Adult Swim is fantastic. But regardless, maybe I'll talk about it later. Maybe someone else will talk about it for me. Thank you guys so much. Have a good weekend.